Here's a rewritten version of the story as a continuous, flowing narrative with no headings, sections, or breaks. Just the tale told straight through in first-person voice, keeping the dramatic tone and details intact, but smoothed into one seamless read. You don't belong here, trash. That's what HOA President Brenda Hutchinson screamed at me when I showed up to clean out my grandfather's old farmhouse. She said my kind of people were ruining her perfect neighborhood. I'm Marcus, a blue-collar electrician from Savannah. I'd just inherited 40 acres in rural Georgia after a 2-year legal battle. All I wanted was to fix up the family property and maybe live there peacefully. But Brenda had other plans. Within a week, I found a stack of official-looking violation notices on my door, 47 infractions, $500 daily fines, the smell of fresh printer ink still hanging in the air from her obviously fake documents. Here's what Brenda didn't know. Sometimes the person you're trying to kick out is actually the one who can kick you out. My grandfather, Ezra Caldwell, was a legend in Millfield County. He built that farmhouse with his own hands in 1943 after coming back from the war. 40 acres of prime timberland, a workshop that smelled like motor oil and old leather, and a heart big enough to help every neighbor who ever knocked on his door. When the Kowalski family's barn burned down in '78, Ezra organized the whole community to rebuild it in 2 weeks. When old Jefferson Lee needed surgery but couldn't afford time off, Ezra harvested his tobacco crop for free. Ezra was the guy who kept this community together through floods, droughts, and economic crashes. I spent every summer on that property, learning to wire electrical circuits while breathing in sawdust and WD-40. Those weathered porch railings still feel rough under your palm, hand-hewn from oak trees he cut himself. This place was my sanctuary when my parents divorced, my college fund when I needed electrical training, my inheritance when Ezra passed. The probate battle nearly broke me. 2 years of lawyers eating my savings while distant cousins claimed they deserved everything. But Ezra's will was bulletproof. He'd hired the best estate attorney in Georgia and updated everything 6 months before he died, specifically to protect me. Brenda Hutchinson, 52, had moved here from Atlanta after her husband Preston's insurance business went belly up in the suburbs. They were house poor, driving that white Escalade on fumes and credit cards, but desperate to maintain appearances in their new rural retreat. Brenda appointed herself neighborhood improvement coordinator to feel important again. The woman measured grass with an actual ruler and carried a clipboard like she was running NASA. One of my favorite entries from Ezra's journal. That new woman drove by 6 times today, counting my chickens. Might get more chickens just to spite her. Tuesday morning, I rolled up to start cleaning the house. The place needed work. Peeling paint, overgrown flower beds, gravel driveway with potholes that could swallow a motorcycle. I was hauling out boxes of Ezra's books when I heard expensive heels clicking on asphalt. Here comes Brenda's personal militia. Preston, the Weatherbys, and Margaret Finch, former PDA terrorist. "Are you the nephew?" Brenda asked, like she was identifying a pest infestation. I introduced myself politely, explained I inherited the property. Big mistake. She handed me this document, thick as a phone book, official violation notice with 47 infractions listed in small print. The smell of fresh laser toner mixed with Brenda's overpowering perfume. As I read the penalties, $500 per day per violation. Quick math came to $23,500 daily in fines. "Ma'am, there's no HOA here," I said. "This property predates." Brenda cut me off. "This is a respectable neighborhood now. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable living somewhere more suitable to your situation." The word situation hit like a slap. Preston stepped forward, chest puffed out. "We're prepared to take legal action. One substandard property can destroy everyone's equity." Knowledge nugget. In Georgia, you can't retroactively impose HOA rules on properties that predate the association. It's called grandfathering, and it's legally bulletproof. That's when I realized this wasn't about property values. This was about power and control. Brenda needed to prove she could eliminate the one neighbor who reminded everyone this used to be working farmland, not suburban paradise. As they walked away, I heard her tell Preston, "Don't worry. These people always fold when you apply enough pressure. We'll have them gone by Christmas." She had no idea that pressure creates diamonds, or that my phone had been recording since our youth and nephew, or that I was about to discover exactly who owned what in this neighborhood. Week 2 started with 3 county vehicles pulling into my driveway like I was running a meth lab. Health department inspector, code enforcement officer, and a fire marshal, all responding to anonymous complaints about septic violations and fire hazards. The health inspector, Rodriguez, walked around looking confused. "Sir, your septic was inspected 6 months ago. Someone reported raw sewage, but I don't see any issues." He lowered his voice. "Between you and me, this address has generated more paperwork than a strip club in a church parking lot." Code enforcement found nothing. The fire marshal actually complimented Ezra's electrical work. "Cleanest panel I've seen in rural Georgia." But while they were inspecting my violations, I noticed something interesting about my property survey. The original 1943 boundary markers showed my land extended 50 feet further east than I'd realized. That gorgeous rose garden Brenda was so proud of, the one she'd spent $15,000 landscaping, sat entirely on my property. The woman had been harassing me from land she was technically trespassing on every single day. Week 3 brought Preston to my door with an official-looking petition. Concerned citizens of Millfield Drive demanding action against my fire hazard property attracting undesirable elements. 23 signatures. Impressive for a street with only 18 houses. I started making calls. Mrs. Henderson never signed anything. The Yamamotos said someone forged their names. My favorite was John and Jane Smith listed at an address that turned out to be a kudzu-covered vacant lot. Back in electrical school, we learned about grandfathering, when new codes can't be applied retroactively to existing installations. Turns out the same principle applies to HOA rules. Brenda's petition wasn't just fraudulent, it was legally meaningless. Week 4 escalated to psychological warfare. Brenda's white Escalade started cruising past my house like a shark circling wounded prey. 6 times, 7 times, 8 times a day. Not just driving, parking across the street, taking pictures, scribbling notes on that cursed clipboard. Then came the anonymous letter slipped under my door Tuesday night. Laser-printed message. "We know what you're doing in that workshop. Drug dealing won't be tolerated. Authorities have been notified." Same printer smell as those fake violation notices. Brenda wasn't just escalating. She was getting desperate. Wednesday afternoon, 2 deputies knocked on my door. "We got a report about suspicious activity." I welcomed them into the workshop where I restore vintage electrical equipment. Deputy Williams, who remembered Ezra, shook his head in disgust. "4th bogus report this month. Someone's yanking our chain." Friday brought Brenda's boldest move yet. I'm heading out for groceries when I find her Escalade parked directly behind my truck, blocking the driveway. She's sitting there like she owns the place, arms crossed, designer sunglasses reflecting my frustration. I tapped on her window. She rolled it down like she was granting an audience. "Ma'am, you're blocking my driveway. This is a public right-of-way." She waved a Google Maps printout highlighted in yellow. "I have every right to park here. The driveway is on my property. You're trespassing. Prove it." That's when I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff. "Hi, this is Marcus Caldwell. I need assistance with a trespassing situation." Brenda's confidence evaporated faster than gas station coffee. She peeled out, spraying gravel like buckshot, but not before I got her license plate on video. That evening, I sat on Ezra's porch swing with a beer and his old surveyor's map spread across my lap. The cicadas were singing their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird was running through its repertoire. This property had seen a lot of history. Births, deaths, celebrations, heartbreaks. Ezra had weathered the Depression, 2 wars, and countless smaller battles to keep this land in our family. Now, some wannabe suburban princess thought she could bully me into abandoning it all. But as I traced my finger along those 1943 boundary lines, a slow smile spread across my face. Brenda's harassment campaign had a fatal flaw. She'd been conducting it from my property the entire time. 2 weeks after the driveway incident, I found this glossy invitation in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, embossed letterhead. Emergency neighborhood meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Thursday night, I walked into that community center, and it was like stepping into a Fortune 500 boardroom. Brenda had a projector, professionally bound handouts, and 3 Atlanta lawyers in $1,000 suits. The smell of fresh toner, mixed with expensive cologne, hung in the air like a corporate funeral. Preston was running a laptop like he was launching missiles. The Weatherbees distributed clipboards with the efficiency of election workers. About 30 people showed up, plus some faces I didn't recognize, probably hired muscle disguised as concerned citizens. Brenda called the meeting to order like she was chairing the Federal Reserve. Ladies and gentlemen, we're addressing the property value crisis threatening our community. First PowerPoint slide. Millfield Heritage Homeowners Association, protecting our investment. I was recording everything from the back row because documenting Brenda's schemes had become like collecting evidence of war crimes. She presented this whole dog and pony show about establishing governance and maintaining standards, complete with pie charts showing declining property values. Then came the grand reveal. An HOA charter thicker than a Stephen King novel, CC and RS covering everything from fence heights to acceptable dog breeds. The legal language was so dense it would give a Supreme Court justice a headache. We've secured 51% household support, Brenda announced, gesturing to a stack of signatures. This charter takes effect immediately. I stood up, phone still recording. Ma'am, which exact 51% signed on? Her smile could have flash-frozen hell. That's confidential during organizational phases. Here's something I remembered from my grandfather's stories about union organizing in the 60s. People lie about signatures when they don't have them. During the coffee break, I started casual conversations. Mrs. Rodriguez never signed anything. The teacher from Oak Lane said someone forged her husband's name. A young couple with twins had been in Florida for 3 weeks. When the meeting resumed, Brenda called for the official vote. She appointed herself president, Preston treasurer, Margaret Finch secretary, Weatherbees as board members. No nominations, no discussions, just a prearranged power grab with parliamentary procedure as window dressing. All in favor. 8 hands from 30 people. Motion carries, she announced. That's when I dropped my bombshell. Point of order. Georgia law requires 67% consent for retroactive HOA formation. You've got 8 votes from 23 eligible properties. That's 35%. This charter is legally invalid. The room went dead silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. One lawyer leaned over and whispered something that made Brenda's face drain of color under her foundation. Legal requirements will be satisfied shortly, she stammered. Jefferson Lee, who'd been Ezra's friend for 40 years, stood up with the dignity of a man who'd weathered worse storms than suburban princesses. Ma'am, my family's been here since 1952. Nobody asked us about any HOA. Mrs. Kowalski jumped in. 30 years next to Ezra. First I'm hearing about neighborhood associations. The tide turned so fast you could hear Brenda's confidence deflating like a punctured tire. She launched into desperate damage control about progressive development and financial protection, but her voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. As people filed out, muttering about wasted evenings and forged signatures, I lingered to photograph the official documents. Those Atlanta lawyers and professional printing hadn't come cheap. Someone was investing serious money in this harassment campaign. Walking to my truck, Rodriguez from the health department caught up with me. Hell of a performance. You know, those anonymous complaints against your property all came from the same IP address trace to a house on Millfield Drive. Boom! There was my smoking gun. Brenda hadn't been randomly targeting me. She'd orchestrated the entire campaign, create a problem property, rally neighbors against it, then position herself as the savior with an HOA solution. Classic manipulation playbook executed with suburban soccer mom ruthlessness. But she made one critical error, getting sloppy with the signatures. In Georgia, fraudulent HOA formation isn't just unethical. It's a prosecutable offense carrying fines and potential jail time. Driving past Brenda's house, every light blazed and shadows moved frantically behind curtains. Emergency war counsel with those expensive lawyers, no doubt. The smell of desperation was probably thick enough to cut with a knife. Tomorrow, I'd make some calls to the state attorney general's office about fraudulent association formation. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully knowing Brenda's master plan was crumbling faster than a house built on sand. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves with their own greed and stupidity. When Brenda's fake HOA imploded, I thought she might retreat and lick her wounds like any normal person. Big mistake. What came next made her previous schemes look like children's games. 3 days after the community center debacle, Millfield Neighborhood Watch appeared on Facebook. Professional logo, curated photos of pristine properties contrasted with deliberately unflattering shots of my place. The description read like a horror movie trailer, protecting property values from deteriorating influences threatening our community. Within hours, Brenda was posting like a woman possessed. My work truck became commercial vehicle violations. Ezra's workshop transformed into unsupervised activities in unmarked structures. She even posted time-lapse footage of me carrying boxes, suggesting I was removing evidence of criminal activity. The comments section turned into a digital lynch mob. Preston questioned whether Ezra had been mentally competent when updating his will. Margaret Finch suggested I'd manipulated an elderly relative for financial gain. The Weatherbys spread rumors about my work history and family background. The acrid smell of character assassination hung in the air like smoke from a dumpster fire. These people weren't just attacking me. They were trying to destroy my grandfather's memory. While screenshot documenting Brenda's post for evidence, I noticed something odd. Her Facebook profile showed she'd lived in beautiful Millfield, Georgia, for 5 years. But the property records I'd been reviewing showed something different. Brenda and Preston had purchased their house 18 months ago, not 5 years, and the previous owner was a development company called Millfield Properties, LLC. I started digging deeper into county records, following a paper trail that made my electrician's brain buzz with pattern recognition. Millfield Properties had purchased 12 houses on our street between 2019 and 2023, all bought below market value, all from elderly owners or estates in financial distress. Then came Brenda's media blitz. Coordinated emails flooded county commissioners demanding immediate action against my threat to neighborhood stability. Professional complaints to zoning boards, tax assessors, environmental agencies, each carbon copied to local news outlets, creating artificial urgency around a manufactured crisis. Tuesday morning brought Channel 7 News to my doorstep. A young reporter with perfect makeup and a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be covering sports. "We're investigating property disputes affecting neighborhood safety," she announced, shoving a microphone toward my face. "Care to respond to allegations about unlicensed business operations?" That's when I realized Brenda's endgame. She convinced the news station I was the story, the problem neighbor disrupting suburban paradise. But after months of dealing with her schemes, I'd learned to stay 3 steps ahead. I invited them in for the full tour, showed them Ezra's workshop where I restore vintage electronics, pulled out county permits for every improvement, explained the family history and community connections spanning 80 years. "So these complaints are unfounded?" the reporter asked, confidence wavering. These complaints are part of a systematic harassment campaign designed to force me off property someone else wants. I replied, handing her my evidence folder. Fraudulent HOA documents, forged signatures, false police reports, it's all documented. That's when Jefferson Lee appeared like divine intervention. You reporters got good timing. Someone heard the truth about what's happening here. For 20 minutes, Jefferson detailed Ezra's legacy and Brenda's harassment campaign. Mrs. Kowalski corroborated everything. Rodriguez from the health department confirmed the bogus complaints. The reporter's narrative flipped entirely. Problem neighbor became harassment victim. Brenda's media manipulation had backfired spectacularly. But the real bombshell came that evening when I connected the final dots. Cross-referencing property records with corporate filings revealed the truth. Preston Hutchinson was listed as managing partner of Millfield Properties, LLC. They weren't just harassing me for kicks. They were trying to force me out so their development company could acquire my property at below-market prices, the same scheme they'd used on 12 other families. The systematic harassment, the fake HOA, the media campaign, it was all cover for a property grab worth potentially millions once they developed the entire street. I sat on Ezra's porch that night listening to cicadas sing their ancient songs while the pieces fell into place. The smell of honeysuckle mixed with the lingering diesel fumes from Brenda's latest surveillance drive-by. Tomorrow, I make some calls to the state attorney general's office about real estate fraud and elder abuse. Tonight, I'd savor the irony that Brenda's desperation to destroy me had led me straight to evidence of her actual crimes. Sometimes when people dig graves for others, they end up falling into holes of their own making. And sometimes the person they're trying to bury owns a lot more than they realize. You know that moment when you're troubleshooting electrical problems and suddenly every confusing wire makes perfect sense. That's exactly what happened when I finally sat down with all of Ezra's documents spread across his old oak dining table. The musty smell of aged paper mixed with the lingering ghost of his pipe tobacco as I worked through manila envelopes he'd labeled in his careful handwriting. Tax records 1960 to 1980, insurance papers. And tucked away in the back of his desk drawer, water rights do not lose. Inside that envelope was the original 1943 land grant, plus a 1960s agreement I'd never seen before. Apparently, our property sits on valuable timber rights and potential natural gas deposits. Interesting, but not immediately useful. Then I found the creek documentation. Miller's Creek doesn't just provide pretty background noise for evening porch sitting. According to these papers, my family owns the riparian rights to the entire waterway, rights dating back to the original federal land grant in Georgia. That means I control every drop of water flowing through this section of the county. I pulled out my phone and started researching. Turns out riparian rights are a big deal. Every house in our neighborhood gets water from wells tapping the aquifer fed by Miller's Creek. During drought years, which are becoming more common, that creek provides the only reliable water source for miles. But here's where my blood ran cold. While researching water law, I stumbled across a pending application with the Georgia Environmental Protection Agency. Someone wanted commercial water extraction permits for our area, permits worth $50,000 annually. The applicant, Preston Hutchinson, representing Georgia Power Company. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder as the pieces snapped together like a perfectly wired circuit board. This wasn't about property values or neighborhood standards. This was about water rights worth potentially millions over the life of the contract. That's why Brenda needed an HOA, legal authority to negotiate for the neighborhood. That's why she'd been systematically targeting me, the one property owner whose consent could kill a deal worth hundreds of thousands. But wait, it gets worse. Digging deeper into the application documents, I found the proposed timeline. Georgia Power wanted to start construction on their new cooling facility within 6 months. The water extraction would begin immediately after permit approval. Every house built after 1960 existed with water access I'd never formally granted. Every well they drilled tapped aquifers fed by my creek. For 60 years, my neighbors had been using water I technically controlled, and I'd been too naive to realize it. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times, its sound echoing through the house like a countdown timer. Outside, I could hear Brenda's Escalade idling for another surveillance run. But now her desperation made perfect sense. If I signed that water rights deal, she and Preston would pocket a massive finder's fee, while Georgia Power gained control of the regional water supply. If I refused, their entire scheme collapsed and potentially left the neighborhood without reliable water access during the next drought. They'd created a situation where I looked like the bad guy no matter what I chose. But here's what Brenda didn't know. Ezra had taught me that sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one, and sometimes the person everyone thinks is powerless actually holds all the cards. Tomorrow, I'd be calling environmental lawyers and the state attorney general's office. Tonight, I'd sit here planning how to protect both my water rights and my neighbor's access to clean drinking water. Turns out the problem neighbor Brenda had been trying to eliminate wasn't just standing in her way. I was the one person who could shut off everyone's water supply. And that gave me a hell of a lot more power than a fake HOA presidency ever could. The first thing I did the next morning was call Catherine Reeves, an environmental attorney in Atlanta who specialized in water rights law. Her secretary tried to brush me off. Ms. Reeves is very busy, but when I mentioned riparian rights in Georgia Power, I got transferred immediately. Mr. Caldwell, Catherine said after I'd explained the situation, you're sitting on something potentially worth millions, but more importantly, you're holding the legal keys to your entire neighborhood's water supply. We need to meet in person. 2 days later, she drove down to the property in a hybrid that looked wildly out of place next to my work truck. Catherine was sharp as a razor, late 40s, silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and the kind of direct gaze that probably made corporate lawyers break out in cold sweats. "Show me the creek," she said, skipping pleasantries entirely. We walked the property line, and she explained water law in terms even a blue-collar electrician could understand. In Georgia, riparian rights are like mineral rights. They run with the land permanently unless explicitly sold or transferred. Your family has owned these water rights for 80 years. That makes them essentially bulletproof. She knelt by the creek bank, testing the water clarity with a small device from her briefcase. The morning sun filtered through oak leaves, casting dancing shadows on the water that had been running through this land since before my grandfather was born. "Here's what Georgia Power is really after," Catherine explained. "Climate change is making water scarce. Power companies need massive amounts for cooling systems. Your creek feeds the entire regional aquifer. Control this, and you control water access for thousands of people. But here's the thing about water rights that most people don't understand. They come with responsibilities, not just privileges. I couldn't legally cut off my neighbor's access without cause, but I could absolutely control how that access was managed and who else got to use it. What I recommend," Catherine said, "is creating a community water sharing agreement. Protect your neighbor's access while maintaining your rights. Then offer Georgia Power a limited partnership instead of a buyout. You keep control. They get regulated access. Everyone wins." That afternoon, I drove over to Jefferson Lee's farm for what we called an accidental meeting. Word travels fast in small communities, and within an hour, the Kowalskis, Mrs. Henderson, and 3 other families had shown up for what turned into an impromptu strategy session on Jefferson's front porch. "Marcus," Jefferson said in his slow, thoughtful way, "your grandfather will be proud of how you're handling this mess. Ezra always said the land would take care of us if we took care of it." Mrs. Kowalski brought homemade pierogi and gossip about Brenda's latest schemes. "That woman's been calling everyone trying to get signatures for some new petition. Says if we don't support her, we'll all lose our water rights to the government." The irony was delicious, Brenda was using fear of losing water access to pressure people into supporting a deal that would actually give away their water access. We spent the next 2 hours planning our counter strategy. Document current water usage by every household, create fair agreements protecting longtime residents, and prepare environmental impact studies proving sustainable management was possible. Jefferson offered his barn for community meetings. The Kowalskis volunteered to reach out to other targeted neighbors who'd been quietly suffering Brenda's harassment. Mrs. Henderson, who'd worked as a paralegal before retiring, offered to help with document preparation. But the most important piece came from an unexpected source. Jenny, our mail carrier, stopped by during the planning session and dropped a bombshell. "You folks know Brenda's been intercepting mail, right?" she said casually while sorting letters. "Caught her going through the Rodriguez family's mailbox last week. Had to file a report with postal inspectors. Mail tampering is a federal crime." Suddenly, we had evidence that Brenda's harassment campaign had crossed into serious legal territory. That evening, I sat in Ezra's workshop, surrounded by his tools and the smell of old motor oil, making lists of everything I needed to accomplish. The legal strategy was coming together like a complex electrical schematic. Every connection had to be perfect or the whole system would fail. Catherine had given me homework. Research every water rights case in Georgia for the past 20 years. Document every neighbor's current water usage. Create a comprehensive environmental management plan that would satisfy both state regulators and community needs. Most importantly, I needed to stay ahead of Brenda's desperation. A cornered animal is dangerous, and she was running out of legal options. The distant sound of her Escalade reminded me she was still conducting surveillance. But now I understood what she was really looking for: evidence of commercial water usage, signs of environmental damage, anything she could use to challenge my water rights in court. Tomorrow I'd start building a legal fortress around those rights. Tonight, I'd enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the tables had finally turned. Sometimes the person you're trying to drown is actually the one who controls the water. You'd think discovering she was trying to steal water rights worth millions might slow Brenda down. Instead, it was like poking a hornet's nest with a cattle prod. Week 12 brought the first wave of vandalism. I woke up Tuesday morning to find red paint splattered across Ezra's workshop walls like some twisted Jackson Pollock painting. The smell of cheap latex mixed with morning dew made my stomach turn. Whoever did this had used a brush, taking time to write "Go home" in dripping letters across the door. My trail cameras caught everything. Brenda's Escalade parked 3 houses down at 2:47 a.m. Dark figure in hoodie and gloves doing the damage. No clear face shot, but the gait and build looked suspiciously like Preston. Week 13 escalated to actual danger. Thursday afternoon, I'm backing out of the driveway when I hear the distinctive pop, pop, pop of tires going flat. 4 roofing nails scattered across the gravel, each one positioned perfectly to catch my truck tires. My dash cam footage showed Brenda's Escalade creeping past 20 minutes earlier, slowing to a crawl at the exact spot where the nails appeared. No direct evidence, but the timing was pretty damn convenient. That's when I called Sheriff's Deputy Williams, who'd known Ezra for 30 years. "Marcus, we've had 17 calls about your property in the past month," he said, shaking his head. "All bogus. Someone's trying real hard to make you look like a problem." "Any idea who?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. "Can't prove anything yet, but keep documenting everything. People this desperate usually make mistakes." Week 14 brought the false police report that crossed every line imaginable. I'm having coffee on the porch when 2 deputies roll up with their hands resting on their weapons. Apparently, someone had called 911 claiming I'd threatened Preston with a shotgun during a violent confrontation at the property line. The whole thing was pure fiction. I'd been at Jefferson Lee's farm helping with hay baling from dawn until dusk. 20 witnesses could verify my whereabouts, but the deputies had to investigate anyway, and the whole neighborhood got to watch me get questioned like a criminal on my own front porch. "Sir, The caller said you threatened to shoot anyone who sets foot on your land. Deputy Martinez explained apologetically. We have to take these reports seriously. After they verified my alibi and left, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Next time we'll make sure you can't prove where you were. That's when Preston made his biggest mistake yet. Friday evening, he showed up at my door alone, carrying a briefcase and wearing his most sincere insurance salesman smile. The man actually thought he could bribe me. Marcus, I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said, setting his briefcase on the porch table. What would it take to make this whole situation go away? I kept my phone recording in my shirt pocket. Georgia's one-party consent law meant I could legally document everything he said. What kind of situation are we talking about, Preston? He opened the briefcase to reveal neat stacks of $100 bills, $75,000 cash. All you have to do is sign a simple water rights transfer and move somewhere more compatible with your lifestyle. The smell of fresh money mixed with his desperate cologne was almost overwhelming. And if I don't? Preston's smile got colder. Well, we have connections in the county government. People who can make life very difficult for someone who won't be reasonable. Zoning violations, tax assessments, environmental inspections. There are lots of ways to pressure uncooperative property owners. There was attempted bribery and extortion, all captured on digital audio. That's an interesting offer, Preston. Let me think about it. After he left, I immediately copied the recording to 3 different devices and emailed it to Catherine. Bribery and extortion are felonies in Georgia, carrying serious prison time. But Brenda's desperation reached peak insanity when she tried to cut off my electricity. Week 15, I come home to find a power company truck leaving and my lights dead. Apparently, someone had called claiming to be me and requesting immediate service disconnection due to safety concerns. The crew chief apologized profusely. Sir, the caller had your account number and personal information. Said there was an electrical fire and the property needed to be isolated immediately. Only someone with access to county records or utility databases could have gotten that information. Either Brenda had inside help or she'd committed identity theft to make the call. That night, sitting by candlelight in Ezra's kitchen, I realized we'd moved far beyond neighborhood disputes. This was systematic harassment designed to force me off valuable property through intimidation and financial pressure. But every escalation created more evidence. Every desperate act pushed Brenda and Preston deeper into criminal territory. And every day I stayed on this land, their water rights scheme fell further behind schedule. Tomorrow, I'd file criminal complaints with the sheriff's department and contact the FBI about mail tampering and identity theft. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully knowing that desperate people make desperate mistakes. And Brenda was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. If I thought Brenda had hit rock bottom with the electricity stunt, I was wrong. What came next proved that desperation doesn't have a floor, it has a basement, and she was determined to find it. Week 16 opened with Brenda calling Atlanta news stations, claiming there was an environmental crisis brewing in rural Millfield County. She'd manufactured a story about me hoarding water rights during a drought emergency and threatening the safety of elderly neighbors who depend on well water. The woman had turned my protection of water rights into a public health conspiracy theory. Channel 11 actually sent a crew out to investigate. I watched from my workshop as they interviewed Brenda on her perfectly manicured lawn, gesturing dramatically toward my property while explaining how one uncooperative landowner was jeopardizing everyone's water security. What she didn't know was that I'd been expecting this move. Catherine had prepared a comprehensive media response package, environmental impact studies, water usage data, and documentation proving my management actually improved watershed quality for the entire area. When a reporter knocked on my door, I was ready. Mr. Caldwell, we're investigating claims that you're restricting neighborhood water access during drought conditions. Happy to clarify that, I said, handing her a folder thick with documentation. These studies show my land management practices have increased aquifer recharge by 30% over the past year. I'm actually improving water security for everyone. The reporter's skeptical expression shifted as she flipped through peer-reviewed environmental assessments and county water department commendations. Brenda's narrative was crumbling in real time, but the media campaign was just cover for Brenda's real escalation, corporate pressure. Georgia Power representatives started calling me directly, their tone shifting from friendly negotiation to barely veiled threats. Mr. Caldwell, we've been very patient, but this project has significant state support. If private negotiations fail, we may need to explore eminent domain proceedings. That's when I learned something interesting about utility companies and eminent domain. They can only seize property for public necessity, and they have to prove that no reasonable alternatives exist. Since I've been offering reasonable compromise solutions through my attorney, their threats were mostly bluff and bluster. Still, corporate lawyers sending friendly letters about government seizure tend to focus a man's attention. Preston escalated to psychological warfare, spreading rumors throughout the community that I was planning to shut off everyone's water unless they supported my unreasonable demands. He held coffee meetings at his house, coaching neighbors on how to testify against me if the dispute went to court. My counterintelligence network, basically Jefferson Lee and Mrs. Kowalski eavesdropping at the grocery store, kept me informed about Brenda's strategy sessions. She'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my family history, hoping to find something that would discredit my inheritance claim. What the PI found instead was 80 years of community service, military honors, and civic leadership. Ezra's reputation was bulletproof, and by extension, so was mine. But Brenda's most dangerous move came when she discovered I'd been building relationships with environmental groups. She somehow learned about my plans to donate conservation easements on 20 acres of the property, protecting the watershed in perpetuity while maintaining my water rights. Her response was to file complaints with the state environmental agency claiming I was operating an unlicensed commercial facility and contaminating groundwater with illegal activities. Each complaint required expensive testing and professional inspections to refute. The irony was delicious. Brenda was using environmental protection laws to attack someone actually protecting the environment. That's when I realized we needed to shift from defense to offense. Catherine had been building a RICO case, racketeering influenced and corrupt organizations, based on the conspiracy between Brenda, Preston, and Georgia Power to fraudulently acquire my property rights. We have documented evidence of mail tampering, identity theft, bribery, extortion, and fraudulent government filings, Catherine explained during our strategy session. That's a federal racketeering case with serious prison time. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My trail cameras had captured more than vandalism. They documented Preston meeting with Georgia Power executives on my property without permission. The audio was clear enough to hear them discussing eliminating the holdout and accelerating pressure tactics. Corporate executives discussing criminal harassment of a private citizen to facilitate a commercial real estate deal. That was conspiracy charges waiting to happen. The final piece fell into place when Jenny, our postal worker, provided federal investigators with evidence of systematic mail tampering. Apparently, Brenda had been intercepting correspondence from my attorney, environmental agencies, and potential allies for months. That evening, I sat on Ezra's porch, watching thunderclouds build over the western hills. The smell of approaching rain mixed with honeysuckle created that uniquely southern atmosphere that makes you believe justice might actually exist in this world. Tomorrow, Catherine would file federal charges and request restraining orders. Tonight, I'd enjoy knowing that Brenda's desperation had finally pushed her across the line into serious federal crimes. Sometimes the best way to catch criminals is to give them enough rope to hang themselves with their own greed and stupidity. The county commissioner's emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. What I didn't expect was the circus that showed up. Brenda arrived like she was running for governor. 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits, a professional publicist, and what looked like hired supporters filling the first 2 rows. She'd even brought media contacts, 2 Atlanta TV stations, and a newspaper reporter. Taking notes like this was the trial of the century. I walked in with Catherine, Jefferson Lee, and about 50 neighbors who'd quietly supported me throughout this whole mess. No fancy suits, no paid crowds, just working people who'd known my family for decades. The meeting room smelled like floor wax and nervous sweat. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while commissioners shuffled papers and tried to look important. Commissioner Blake, a decent man who'd served 2 terms, called the session to order. We're here to address ongoing disputes regarding property rights and neighborhood governance in the Millfield area, he announced. Mrs. Hutchinson, you requested this hearing. Brenda stood up with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the room. Her PowerPoint presentation was professionally designed, complete with charts showing declining property values and environmental threats posed by uncooperative landowners. Commissioners, we're facing a crisis that threatens the safety and financial security of our entire community, she began, clicking to a slide showing my property from deliberately unflattering angles. One individual is blocking reasonable development that would benefit everyone while hoarding essential resources during drought conditions. She presented her petition with over 200 signatures demanding county intervention, showed photographs of my deteriorating property affecting neighborhood character, implied that my refusal to cooperate with Georgia Power was motivated by environmental extremism rather than property rights. The performance was impressive, professional, polished, and completely dishonest. When she finished, Commissioner Blake turned to me. Mr. Caldwell, would you like to respond? I stood up slowly, the way Ezra had taught me. No rushing, no dramatics, just steady confidence. Commissioners, I'd like to present some evidence that puts Mrs. Hutchinson's claims in proper context. Catherine handed me the first folder. This is an audio recording made legally under Georgia's one-party consent law. It documents Mr. Preston Hutchinson attempting to bribe me with $75,000 to abandon my property rights. I played 30 seconds of Preston's voice offering cash and threatening county pressure. The room went dead silent except for the hum of recording equipment. This, I continued, producing the second folder. Documents systematic mail tampering, identity theft, and fraudulent police reports filed by Mrs. Hutchinson over the past 4 months. Commissioner Martinez leaned forward. Are you alleging criminal activity? I'm presenting evidence of criminal activity. Federal postal inspectors are investigating mail tampering. The Sheriff's Department has documented 17 false reports. The State Attorney General is reviewing fraudulent HOA formation. Brenda's face went 3 shades paler under her makeup. One of her lawyers whispered something urgent in her ear. But I wasn't finished. Most importantly, Commissioners, I want to clarify something about water rights. I pulled out the environmental impact studies. These independent assessments prove my land management has improved water quality and increased aquifer recharge for the entire neighborhood. I'm not hoarding water, I'm protecting it. That's when Jefferson Lee stood up with the dignity of a man who'd weathered worse storms than suburban princesses. Commissioners, I've lived next to the Caldwell family for 40 years. Ezra Caldwell helped every neighbor who ever needed it, and his grandson is following that same tradition. Mrs. Kowalski rose next. Marcus has offered fair water sharing agreements to every family on our street. The only people he's refused to work with are the ones trying to steal his property. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Deputy Williams approached the commissioner's table with an official document. Sir, I need to interrupt. We have active warrants for Preston and Brenda Hutchinson on charges of conspiracy, extortion, and mail tampering. The room erupted. Brenda's supporters suddenly discovered urgent appointments elsewhere. Her lawyers started whispering about client confidentiality. The media perked up like bloodhounds catching a scent. Furthermore, Williams continued, the FBI is investigating allegations of racketeering involving attempts to fraudulently acquire water rights through systematic harassment. Brenda finally lost it. This is ridiculous. That man is destroying our neighborhood. He doesn't belong here with decent people. And there it was. The mask finally slipped completely off. Commissioner Blake banged his gavel. Mrs. Hutchinson, that's enough. Based on the evidence presented, this commission finds no grounds for county intervention in Mr. Caldwell's property rights. Furthermore, we're referring this matter to state authorities for investigation of fraudulent petitions and harassment. As deputies approached with handcuffs, Brenda made one last desperate play. You can't do this. We have investors. Georgia Power has contracts. Actually, I said quietly, Georgia Power withdrew their application yesterday after reviewing the federal investigation. Apparently, they don't want to be associated with criminal enterprises. The look on Brenda's face as the handcuffs clicked shut was worth every sleepless night, every false report, every moment of harassment she'd put me through. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but when it finally arrives, it's beautiful to watch. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on Brenda's wrists was music to my ears. But what happened next was even sweeter. Within 72 hours, for sale signs popped up like dandelions after rain. Brenda and Preston's house went up first, followed by the Weatherbys and Margaret Finch. Amazing how fast people with guilty consciences can pack when federal investigators come knocking. I dropped the charges against Brenda in exchange for a public apology and immediate departure. Her letter to the county newspaper was poetry. I sincerely apologized to Marcus Caldwell and the Millfield community for my inappropriate behavior and false accusations. Mr. Caldwell has demonstrated exemplary property, stewardship, and community leadership. The smell of crow must have been overwhelming when she wrote that. Georgia Power's withdrawal from the water rights scheme freed me to implement my real plan, the Ezra Caldwell Memorial Conservation Area. 20 acres donated to the county as permanent parkland, protecting the watershed while keeping my family's water rights intact. The community transformation was like watching a garden bloom after winter. Jefferson Lee and I built walking trails through the new park. Mrs. Kowalski started a community garden where neighbors grew vegetables and gossip in equal measure. The sound of children's laughter replaced Brenda's surveillance drives. Ezra's workshop became the Millfield tool library, neighbors borrowing equipment instead of buying tools they'd use once. The familiar smells of motor oil and old leather mixed with fresh sawdust as folks restored furniture, repaired engines, and rebuilt relationships Brenda had tried to poison. My personal life took an unexpected turn when Sarah Martinez, the elementary teacher who'd organized community support, started checking on the tool library with suspicious frequency. Coffee conversations evolved into dinner dates, then evening walks along Miller's Creek, discussing everything from water conservation to wedding plans. The first annual Millfield Heritage Festival raised $15,000 for a scholarship fund supporting local kids pursuing skilled trades. Real jobs for real people. Electricians, plumbers, mechanics, the backbone careers that keep communities running. But the legal victory had legs beyond our little neighborhood. My case became precedent for challenging fraudulent HOAs statewide. The Attorney General's office used our evidence to investigate similar schemes in 3 counties, protecting dozens of families from property theft disguised as community improvement. Environmental groups showcased my watershed management as a model for private conservation. College students now tour the creek Brenda tried to sell to corporate interests, studying sustainable water management in action. The sweetest justice came 18 months later when a young family with twins bought Brenda's old house. Their children's bicycles now sit in the same driveway where she used to park for surveillance missions. Their daughter's art projects hang on refrigerator magnets where Brenda once plotted my destruction. Preston's insurance business collapsed under fraud convictions. Last I heard, he's selling used cars in Macon under an assumed name. Brenda retreated to Atlanta, facing civil lawsuit from other neighborhoods where she tried similar scams. Turns out I wasn't her first victim, just her last successful one. The scholarship fund exploded beyond our wildest dreams. Local contractors donated materials for trade workshops. The community college partnered with us for weekend courses in traditional skills, blacksmithing, timber framing, sustainable agriculture. Sitting on Ezra's porch swing Sunday evenings watching Sarah tend the flower beds he'd loved, I think about how this started with someone calling me trash and threatening to destroy my family's legacy. Instead, her attacks forced me to discover just how valuable that legacy really was. Not just land or water rights, but community connections, environmental stewardship, and responsibility to protect both for future generations. The evening breeze carries sounds of children playing in Ezra's Memorial Park. Somewhere in the distance, Sarah hums while watering tomatoes that grow where Brenda's rose garden used to trespass on my property. You know what they say about trash? Sometimes what people try to throw away turns out to own the whole damn neighborhood. If you've survived HOA nightmares or property harassment, drop your story in the comments. Your experience might save someone else from similar bullies. And if you loved watching Brenda get her comeuppance, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner. Some battles are worth fighting. Some legacies are worth protecting. And sometimes the best revenge is just living well on land that's rightfully yours. That's all for today's HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Justice never gets old.